The sun dipped low in the sky, painting the quiet suburban park in hues of gold and amber. Alexis Carter, a black woman in her mid-30s, slowed her pace as she concluded her evening run. Clad in a bright red hoodie and scuffed running shoes, she exuded the calm confidence of someone who had faced countless challenges before. As an FBI tactical expert, precision wasn't just part of her job, it was her way of life. Yet tonight, Alexis craved nothing more than the serenity of the fading daylight before heading home. Near the edge of the trail, an older man crouched beside his bike, his hands blackened with grease as he struggled with a broken chain. Noticing his frustration, Alexis veered off course and approached him. "Looks like that bike's giving you a hard time," she said with a friendly smile. The man looked up, his expression shifting from irritation to relief. "Yeah, it's not my lucky day," he replied. "Good thing I'm handy with tools," Alexis said, pulling a multi-tool from her backpack. She crouched beside him and began working on the chain with practiced ease. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the low growl of an approaching truck. A rusty pickup rumbled into view, its decrepit frame trembling as it came to an abrupt halt nearby. 3 men climbed out, their flannel shirts stained and torn, their expressions hardened with menace. Alexis stiffened, her instincts kicking in immediately. Well, the tallest man drawled, his tone dripping with mockery. "What do we have here?" His sharp gaze flicked between Alexis and the older man. The tension in the air was palpable. Alexis stood slowly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Something I can help you with?" The man's smirk widened. "Help? Oh, we were just wondering what someone like you is doing around here at this hour," he sneered, his emphasis on "you" as sharp as a blade. Behind him, the stockiest of the trio spat on the ground near Alexis's feet. Years of experience had prepared Alexis for moments like this. She stayed composed, her voice level. "Just heading home. Now, if you'll excuse me." Before she could finish, the leader stepped into her path, his smirk hardening into a glare. "Not so fast," he said, his tone darkening. "You think you can just walk through here like you own the place? Maybe you need a reminder of whose place this is." Alexis's hand brushed the edge of her backpack, where a discreet comms device rested, a lifeline she hoped she wouldn't need. Her eyes darted between the men, taking in every detail. The leader had a knife clipped to his belt. The stocky man held a chain wrapped around his wrist, and the wiry one hung back slightly, favoring his left leg, a potential weak spot. She knew she could handle them, but she hoped it wouldn't come to that. "You don't want to do this," Alexis said firmly, but her calm demeanor only seemed to embolden them. The leader lunged first, his knife aimed low. Alexis sidestepped gracefully, grabbing his wrist and twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the ground, and she delivered a swift kick to his knee, sending him crumpling with a groan. The stocky man cursed and swung his chain in a wide arc. Alexis ducked, countering with a sharp jab to his ribs. He staggered, gasping for air. The wiry man hesitated for a moment before rushing forward, but Alexis used his momentum against him, tripping him and sending him sprawling. The 3 regrouped, their humiliation replaced with fury. By now, a small crowd had gathered, their murmurs adding to the tension. "You think you're tough?" the stocky man snarled, grabbing a crowbar from the truck bed. "Let's see how tough you are now." Alexis remained steady, her mind racing as she calculated her next move. She knew she could end this, but the growing crowd complicated things. Just then, the flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser lit up the park. Relief was short-lived. The 2 officers who emerged hesitated, their gazes shifting uneasily between Alexis and the 3 men. The leader seized the moment, clutching his injured knee as he cried out, "Officers, she attacked us. Came out of nowhere. Crazy as hell." Alexis's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. "That's not what happened," she said, her voice firm. "These men assaulted me." One of the officers, a wiry man with tired eyes, interrupted her. "Ma'am, put your hands where we can see them." For a moment, disbelief washed over Alexis, but she knew better than to let her emotions take over. I'm the victim here, she said evenly. They attacked me. The second officer, burly and stern, hesitated, doubt flickering across his face. The leader smirked, emboldened by their hesitation. You assumed, Alexis said coldly, her voice slicing through the tension. She reached into her jacket, pulling out her FBI badge and holding it up for all to see. Special Agent Carter, FBI Tactical Unit. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones that had been recording the fight now focused on the badge. The officers stiffened, their faces pale. You just assaulted a federal agent, Alexis said, her tone cutting. I suggest you stop talking before you dig yourself into a deeper hole. The leader's bravado crumbled. The wiry man groaned in pain, and the stocky man stood frozen, his crowbar slipping from his grasp. The older officer finally barked out, "Arrest them." The younger officer moved quickly, cuffing the men as the crowd erupted into scattered cheers. As the men were loaded into the cruiser, one officer approached Alexis, his face filled with regret. Agent Carter, we didn't realize. Do better next time, Alexis said sharply, cutting him off. Without another word, she walked away, the crowd parting to let her through. As Alexis reached the edge of the park, she paused to catch her breath. The night was quiet again, but the weight of what had happened lingered. This fight was over, but she knew the bigger battle, the one against bias and systemic injustice, was far from won. With her head held high, Alexis disappeared into the night, her resolve unshaken. The flight attendant's voice rose loud enough for everyone to hear, sharp and commanding, dripping with condescension. I'm going to ask you one last time. Ma'am, move to the back of the plane, or I will call security. Amara Jackson, a composed woman in her late 30s, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blazer, looked up calmly. Her voice was soft but firm. I've already told you, I'm not moving. Her tone, though measured, carried an undeniable strength that silenced the murmurs around her. No one could have guessed what would happen next when the woman they presumed powerless finally revealed who she really was. As we delve into this gripping story, if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their background, hit the subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from. The private jet gleamed on the tarmac under the late afternoon sun. Its sleek design exuded luxury, promising a comfortable journey for its select passengers. Inside, the cabin was a display of opulence, plush leather seats, gold accents, and ambient lighting that whispered exclusivity. Passengers were escorted aboard, their designer luggage rolling behind them as attendants greeted them warmly. Among them was Amara, her quiet confidence palpable as she made her way to her seat. A seasoned businesswoman and CEO, Amara had spent years building her empire from the ground up. She preferred to travel incognito, letting her actions speak louder than her status. As she settled into her seat, she opened a book, content to remain unnoticed. The lead flight attendant, Madison Pierce, moved through the cabin, her demeanor polished but her gaze sharp. In her early 40s, Madison prided herself on maintaining control, though her attitude often shifted depending on her perception of the passengers. Her crisp uniform and perfect smile masked her underlying prejudices. As Madison greeted the other passengers, her tone was warm and inviting. She stopped briefly to chat with the Stevenses, a wealthy couple in their 60s who were frequent flyers. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Stevens," she said with a bright smile. "Always a pleasure to have you on board." But when Madison approached Amara, her demeanor changed. Her smile faded, replaced by a forced politeness. "Welcome aboard," she said curtly, barely glancing at Amara before moving on. Amara's calm eyes followed Madison for a moment, her expression unreadable. She turned back to her book, unbothered but not oblivious to the shift in tone. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Madison's subtle hostility toward Amara became more apparent. She made a point of ignoring her when offering pre-flight refreshments, ensuring others were served first. Amara finally spoke up, her voice steady and polite. "Excuse me, may I have some water?" Madison's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll get to you when I can," she said dismissively. Walking away, other passengers began to notice. A businessman seated across the aisle frowned at Madison's behavior. his disapproval evident. Still, Amara remained composed, her demeanor unshaken. Moments later, the real confrontation began. Madison returned, her irritation barely concealed, and addressed Amara loudly. "Excuse me, ma'am, I think you're in the wrong seat. This section is reserved for our premium passengers." Amara looked up from her book, her tone calm but firm. "I believe this is my seat. Perhaps you should check the passenger list." Madison's eyes narrowed. "I don't need to check anything," she snapped. "You don't belong here." Gasps rippled through the cabin. The tension was palpable as passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Amara's calm reply cut through the silence. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. Madison crossed her arms. "If you don't move, I'll have security escort you off this plane." Amara tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. "Do what you need to do," she said simply. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder. A socialite seated nearby whispered, "She's probably trying to sneak into first class." But not everyone was quick to judge. The businessman leaned over, his voice calm but firm. "Is there a problem here?" he asked Madison. Madison's irritation bubbled over. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if you didn't interfere," she snapped. "This passenger doesn't belong in this section." The businessman raised an eyebrow. "From where I'm sitting, you're the one causing a scene," he said evenly. Just then, the cockpit door opened, and the pilot stepped out, his expression serious. He approached Madison, his voice low but firm. "Madison, we need to talk," he said. Madison frowned, clearly confused. "What is it?" The pilot's gaze shifted to Amara, then back to Madison. "I just received a message from headquarters. Ms. Jackson is the owner of this plane." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Gasps filled the cabin as passengers turned to look at Amara, their expressions a mix of shock and awe. Madison's face turned pale, her confidence evaporating. "What?" she stammered. "That can't be right." The pilot's tone was firm. "It's true. Ms. Jackson owns this airline." Madison's knees seemed to buckle under the weight of her mistake. Amara stood slowly, her calm presence commanding the room. "I gave you every opportunity to treat me with respect," Amara said, her voice steady but sharp. "You chose prejudice over professionalism, and now you'll face the consequences." As the police arrived to escort Madison off the plane, Amara addressed the passengers. "To everyone here, I apologize for what you had to witness today. This is not the standard I expect on my flights. Moving forward, we will ensure every passenger is treated with the respect they deserve." The cabin erupted in applause as Amara took her seat. Justice had been served, and a powerful lesson had been learned, one that would resonate far beyond that single flight.